Good morning and welcome to our Electronic Community Services Committee meeting on August 9th, 2022. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, committee members are practicing physical distancing and or are participating electronically. Regional Chair Redmond, Councillors Galloway, Jowett, Foxton, Jaworski, Kiefer, Verbanovich, Santz, and I are present in the council chambers. I will now call on Julie Hale, Committee Clerk, to conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Chair Clark.
Here.
Oh, yes. Councillor Redmond, Regional Chair Redmond, I'm sorry.
Present.
Councillor Verbanvik.
Present.
Councillor Jaworski. Councillor Lorenz.
Here.
Councillor Jowett.
Here.
Councillor Erb.
Present.
Councillor Nowak.
Present.
Councillor Kiefer.
Here.
Councillor Majaury.
Present.
Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Harris. Councillor Shantz.
Here.
Councillor Strickland. Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Galloway.
Here.
Thank you.
Just for notice, Michael Harris called me. He will be here later today. He's on the road.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather virtually today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? I see none. Before we hear from staff regarding item 4.1, interim response to homelessness in the region of Waterloo, we're going to hear from the delegations, as 3 out of our 4 delegations are speaking about that item. We will begin with Kim Rodrigues, though, as she's not speaking about item 4.1, and then we'll continue with the remaining 3 delegates. So if we can bring, oh, there's Kim. Hi, Kim. I would like to remind all delegations of some guidance for participation. Please leave your video camera turned off and your microphone audio muted until you're called upon to speak. Today's delegations will be allotted 5 minutes to speak. Groups of 2 or more will be allotted 10 minutes. Any delegations who registered after the deadline will be allotted 3 minutes to speak. These time allotments are in line with the pilot project that has been undertaken since 2021 and will continue to be followed this morning. Sorry. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You're then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast live via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting. Interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, turning your camera on at inappropriate times, and hate speech or defamatory comments. And one last reminder for delegations, please don't take offense if following your presentation there are no questions from council. This is council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. Thank you. So Kim, you can go ahead and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. As introduced, I'm Kim Rodrigues. I'm the Executive Director here at the Child Witness Center.
Kim, I'm sorry, we're having some audio difficulties here, so I'm just going to ask you to give us a second. Can we get that a little louder? Okay. Sorry, Kim, that will not count as your time. Go ahead.
Absolutely. All right. Good morning, everyone. As introduced, I'm Kim Rodrigues, the Executive Director at the Child Witness Center, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. The past few years have brought difficulties most of us probably never imagined we would face in our lifetime. And sadly, it is children and youth here at home who have suffered some of the worst ill effects in experiencing and witnessing abuse and crime while so often being stuck at home, sometimes very close to the perpetrator. Home has not been a safe place for everybody in our community. More than twice daily, a child finds the courage to tell someone they have been experiencing physical or sexual abuse or have been exposed to domestic violence. Here in the Waterloo region, police press an average of 11 charges per week for crimes directly harming a child. Year over year, demand for our services has increased, and then came the pandemic. Our hearts break to imagine, even for a moment, how much those who cannot help themselves have been through behind closed doors. In our 40-year history, the demand for our services is at the highest it's ever been. Being a young victim or witness of abuse or crime is certainly traumatic enough, never mind going through our adversarial criminal justice system, which is often intimidating and overwhelming, even for adults. We walk through the criminal justice process with our clients, providing comfort, support, education, and advocacy every step of the way. And this can often take up to 2 years of support and services. Our services begin during the investigative stage at the Waterloo Region Child and Youth Advocacy Centre, where we provide oversight of the centre and services through our Child and Youth Advocate program. We provide a safe landing place, listening ear, and advice while connecting children and youth to critical resources to begin moving forward. Our partners in this collective safety net include Family and Children's Services, Waterloo Regional Police, Women's Crisis Services, and more. When charges are laid, young people and their families are referred to our Child Witness program, where they are supported through the criminal court process. This includes advocacy, preparing for court, and eventually testifying against the accused. We also have Monet, the first accredited facility dog to work in the criminal justice system in the region. She enhances our trauma-informed practice by providing emotional and mental health support to our clients, offering significant comfort and alleviating stress and anxiety. The impact of our work is immediate. From the start, children and youth experience positive transformation in their mental health, emotional well-being, and resiliency to face tomorrow with hope. Without us, there is simply no one else that does the work that we do, which would leave many young victims falling through the cracks of our systems. And the long-term impact is tremendous. When unsupported, we know that young people are 4 times as likely to report self-harm or suicidal ideation, or 26 times more likely to experience homelessness later in life. With early intervention, the demand for downstream services related to family violence, mental health, addictions, and even homelessness is greatly reduced. One past client recently shared, "The CWC helped put my mind at ease. It was my safe place in my shattered world. They gave me hope in the midst of despair." And another survivor of abuse put it bluntly and said, "The support of the Child Witness Centre for me was life-saving." We have struggled to be able to maintain our critical services throughout the pandemic, in large part because 80% of our funding comes from donors, fundraising events, and corporate sponsorship. The Region of Waterloo has supported our agency for 18 years straight, with funding stopping in 2018 when we received a little over $9,000. Our ability to fundraise to keep our doors open has dropped by over 20% during the pandemic, which is making it next to impossible to meet the current and growing demand in our community. We're appealing to this community because the children and youth of our community need and deserve to be supported. With the demand for our services at an all-time high and growing, the funding you can provide is vital towards young people and their families receiving our help. We are asking for a one-time grant of $50,000 and to consider us in future annualized funding. Additionally, we are looking for your support and your voice towards sustained funding from the province. Your commitment will support more than 50 children and their families, providing key support and preventative work, ultimately reducing the likelihood of being re-victimized and repeating the cycle of victimization. It simply should not be a luxury for the children and youth of Waterloo Region who are victims of sexual and physical assault to receive the support that they so desperately need. We're looking for your help to help keep our doors open to serving the most vulnerable in our community. Thank you for your consideration and your support.
Thank you, Kim. And I see a question from Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, Chair, through the Chair. Kim, exactly how much were you asking for?
For $50,000.
Okay, and would this fall under the grant process, Chair?
Yeah, I believe this would be a discretionary grant, and as council members know, later on today in our Admin and Finance Committee, we will be talking about staff's recommendation to revise our current discretionary grants practices and policies. My suggestion, and I don't mean to anticipate what you might be
I'm heading that
heading
way.
towards, Councillor Foxton, but my suggestion was going to be that we refer this to staff for follow-up.
And that's what I was going to ask is how would they proceed with the granting?
Yeah, I think in the long term, there will be an open call type process for discretionary grants, but at this point, I believe that we've simply been sending them back to staff when we've had these requests.
So,
I stand to be corrected.
I would, if I may, Kim, keep your eye out on the opportunity to apply for the grant through our new granting process, because that should happen before we get into the end of the budget anyway, so you should look at mid to late fall.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to, I'm not sure if there's a staff person here who can speak to that or would like to speak to that. You mean the timing? The timing, yeah. Mr. Dyer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that's something that when staff are reviewing the request, we could provide some guidance on, and depending on the outcome of the conversation at A&F later today, we can provide some advice to the delegation.
Thank you. I see no other comments or questions. Kim, is that clear, or were we talking insider talk?
No, that's clear.
Okay,
Thank you
thanks
so
very
much. And
much.
thank you again for your opportunity.
Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, we're going to move on to the next group of delegations who are speaking to the Homelessness and Housing Interim Plan. And we're going to start with David Alton and the members of Kitchener's Lived Expertise Working Group. So David, I see you, so you are up, and you and your group have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair and Council. So hello, my name is David, and I'm the facilitator of Kitchener's Lived Expertise Working Group on Housing. This group is a collaboration between the Social Development Center and the City of Kitchener to incorporate lived expertise consultation on a long term over the development and implementation of Kitchener's Housing for All strategy. So today we have one of our members of our working group who has prepared a delegation and would love to share some of their thoughts. So I'm just going to pass it on to them.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time to listen to me. I am proud and grateful to be representing Lived Expertise Working Group today. This group consists of extremely smart, resourceful, and talented individuals who have first-hand experience of living in poverty and varying levels of homelessness. Despite our endless trials and tribulations, we are happy to work with you to improve the lives of the many people that so desperately need our help, care, and attention. My name is Mauleek Bhatt. I came to Canada as a student in 2013. I graduated with a degree in computer information systems in 2016 and secured a job in the tech industry as a software engineer. Things were going quite well for a while, but some management changes led to me being wrongfully dismissed. I went to a lawyer for help, but they were far from helpful. I was compelled to start working as a food delivery person for Skip the Dishes and DoorDash. Then came the series of unfortunate events, deemed with an acute lack of support and resources due to me not being a Canadian citizen. I ended up being homeless in 2019, right before the pandemic struck. It was a harrowing experience, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but it made me kinder, stronger, and with a deeper understanding of some of the issues that ails society today. I am reminded of a quote from one of my favorite TV shows, Doctor Who. Human progress isn't measured by industry. It's measured by the value you place on a life, an unimportant life, a life without privilege. There are people dying of preventable overdoses, worsening medical conditions, constantly living under stress and trauma every single day. That is not a healthy way to live. So what is the solution? A human rights-based approach. We know that the current housing-first approach isn't working for the 1,000 plus unsheltered people in the region. Right now, they are stuck between being criminalized and living in unsafe housing conditions. Everyone deserves a safe, secure, and dignified place to call home. How do we get there? As part of this working group, these recurring themes keep arising in our discussions. We need a timeline for permanent housing for all. In the meantime, we need to incorporate lived expertise throughout the homelessness strategy. We appreciate that we are being consulted and heard, but it shouldn't end there. We need to be part of the solution. More programs like Sanguine's Wins need to be funded. What is great about programs like that is that it hires people with lived experience to directly do the work for the community. The people living in these tough times are more likely to relate with us since we have experienced similar circumstances and are more willing to interact with us rather than the police. This builds trust in the region and makes more responsive housing solutions. We need to decriminalize homelessness now. People with lived experience can again help you by building civilian response teams to attend to overdose and other mental health related issues, not the police. These teams should include doctors, nurses, mental health and addictions workers, and people with lived expertise. We know that the police and security are so much more expensive and less effective than we could be. We need to support encampments by providing basic needs like food, water, sanitation, and hire and equip people with lived expertise to provide services in encampments. We are excited to see the region considering setting up more transitional housing and exploring hybrid outdoor options. We want to push you to have these measures work with encampments and the communities that are flourishing there. To reiterate, we need to incorporate lived expertise throughout the implementation process and to decriminalize homelessness so our unsheltered community can thrive. I would like to share with you a verse I wrote for a rap. I performed with rapper Kalichi and other folks with lived expertise for Overdose Awareness Day 2020. Every day I struggle to get out of this trap. Everybody says you can do whatever you want. Guess what? I can't. Different levels of the same disease. From these things, we yearn to be freed. Abused, neglected, punished, pushed aside, on high alert all the time. Hungry, lonely, thirsty for a better life. I need to be loved. I deserve to be alive. We need to be loved. We deserve to be alive. I now hand over the floor to David. Thank you for your time.
I just want to thank Mauleek for representing our group today. We had another representative who had prepared a poem. Unfortunately, they weren't able to make it this morning in time, but we'd love to share it with you either maybe at another future meeting or over email. Through our discussions, we've been kind of working with staff over the past 2 weeks to kind of analyze this strategy and develop some comments for it. It's been a very quick process. And as Mauleek mentioned, we're very strong advocates that lived expertise should be a longer ongoing process throughout both the development and the implementation. And something that has come up a lot in our discussions as a group is just when we look at the actions in the strategy, like for example, transitional housing or the hybrid model, outdoor shelter model, that there is a lot of vacant properties or vacant or underutilized housing throughout our region. And there's just the group really would like to really encourage the council to really consider leveraging as many tools as possible and as many properties as possible to be activating transitional housing and new hybrid kind of options so that we can meet the unsheltered need in our community. And so we as a lived expertise working group are looking forward to continuing to work with council and staff on the development of this strategy and other methods of engaging with unsheltered populations and ending homelessness in our region. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, David, Mauleek, and please do send, if you can, I think you have our email addresses, but if it's easier, you could send the presentation to the clerk and share it with us that way. That would be appreciated. You do have a few questions, if you don't mind hanging around, and I'm going to start with Councillor Galloway.
Well, thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, David and Mauleek, for the presentation. I thought it was quite compelling, particularly personal experience, and thanks for. That's not always easy to do. I'm wondering, David, whether or not you plan on making a similar presentation to our provincial representatives locally, because they're the ones that control most of the purse strings, and I think they could benefit from some of the same messaging that you've brought to us here today.
Yeah, I think that is something that is very much in the interests of the Lived Expertise Working Group. When we've been discussing kind of our priorities for kind of our term, the top two priorities that have come up is supporting our neighbors in encampments and trying to help navigate across the various different jurisdictions when it comes to housing, so that we can have a cohesive response and lived expertise informing the whole, like across jurisdictions, the whole response for housing. So we definitely are interested in engaging with the province and provincial representatives on that process.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. Thanks very much, then.
Councillor Bhatt.
Thank you very much, and thanks, David and Mauleek, for coming in today and making the presentation that you have, and thank you for the work that you're doing on the city's lived expertise working group. I know Andrew and our staff and council really appreciate it. I just want to dig a little deeper into the recommendations, and I know we haven't seen the presentation that'll be coming up shortly, but I know you're aware of it. And I'm just wondering, as we look at the sort of the ranking of the various options, the one thing that certainly would seem relevant to me is the notion around the managed site, and the fact that we know that, not just obviously on the location at Victoria and Weber, but throughout the region, we're seeing a large number of individuals living in encampments. And some of the other options that we're talking about, like the transitional housing and so on, will take a little longer to implement, just by virtue of the work that's involved to make it happen. And so from your perspective, do you think looking at a managed site and trying to implement that early on in the process should maybe be a priority, and that might in fact, reprioritize that ranking order that we see in the recommendation today?
Yeah, we definitely, when we were looking both at the 4 options in the report and then the 7 options that were in the kind of the preliminary report, there was definitely great interest in kind of the managed option of outdoor tenting within the group. I think for people in the group, the interest is trying to take a human rights approach, and so on the one hand, that there's like a certain urgency to that. The timelines kept coming up as an important question. How do we make sure that all people who are currently outdoor tenting or in unstable housing are receiving adequate housing in a quick timeline? Like winter is coming, and many people in the group have experienced how terrible winter is for people who are in unsafe shelters. So it definitely was something that was considered, and as mentioned, like the group was very interested in first off, the idea of we have many people in the community are already in encampments or in outdoor tenting situations. How do we approach those people in a way that, the lens of decriminalizing, in a way that honors the choices they're making and makes them and keeps them safe and protects them in a way from the process of being criminalized just for not having adequate housing. And so when we were looking at the options, people kept thinking, well, what does this mean for everyone, all the people who are currently out there? So that's why the idea of sanctioned encampments or managed encampments was very interesting to this group, to try and help people have options that allow them to not experience criminalization. And then obviously, people were very interested in the idea of managed, like having resources there, having peer support workers, having outreach workers there. So I would say overall, it was an option that was very interested by the group because of its quick timeline and the fact that it allows people who are currently, allows a broader population of people who are currently experiencing unstable shelter to have access to, meets people where they're at, as Mauleek said, which was something that was very important, to meet people where they're at.
For sure. And my second question and last question, we obviously saw a significant increase in from between the 2019 and the 2021 point in time count. And I'm wondering if you have a sense from the work that you're doing with the lived expertise working group. My sense is that those numbers have continued to grow, but I'm wondering if anecdotally you have any information that you can share with council in that regard.
I'm definitely seeing nods from the working group members here in the room that there has been an increase. Mauleek, I don't know if you want to just share a little bit of what you've seen over the past year from your experience. Here, I'll pass it over to you.
So the encampment at Victoria and Weaver, and then the new one at the in Victoria Park. It's just it's obvious. So the shelters closed down. There isn't enough shelter spaces. Sure, there's a new place. I believe it's called Edith McIntosh. It's an interim housing facility, but again, it's nowhere close to enough room for the amount of people that are actually experiencing the trouble. And these numbers are agreed; they are going up. You're absolutely right about that. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to both of you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Majaury.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the delegations. I also found that this particular delegation is very helpful. It helps to balance some of the perceptions, and I would say the judgmental folks out there that we see on social media often, that really feel that they need to criminalize people in encampments and it's a choice. And we know here that encampment is happening not just in the urban cores, but certainly through the townships and rural areas as well. Any deep dive into media right now shows that encampments are growing literally across Ontario and Canada, if not globally. And I think that the story that was told this morning is certainly part of the narrative that we hear, that all of us may be just one paycheck away of suddenly finding ourselves without employment and homeless, and the experience that somebody in our community has when that happens. So I find that this is a very compelling story. I think the timing is good as well, although here we are in the region trying to manage, trying to find more housing options, more supports for those living in encampments or living in tents or outdoors. But we're heading into AMO next week, the Association of the Municipalities of Ontario, where municipalities are able to meet with provincial ministers. This is the top story that we are telling to our provincial ministers and looking for more supports. So having this story in our back pocket while we're meeting with our upper level of government next week is really helpful for us to paint the picture of why in their upcoming provincial budget, which I think is going to be unfolded within this week, needs to really focus on supports to municipalities, to the region, in order to help not only prevent homelessness to begin with, but to add the supports that any individual in our community needs when they find themselves in an encampment. So I guess my question would be to the delegation, could we have a couple of those stories that are very brief, either redacted from names or names there that we could have ahead of going to AMO this weekend so that we can share some of those stories and the leave behind information that we give to the ministries. I think many people focus on mental health and addictions issues, which is a huge reason why people are addicted. But the stories you tell this morning can show the balance for that. So would we be able to share some of these stories?
Again, I'm seeing nods from the working group members in the room that they are happy to share these stories. I would say that because the Social Development Center and the City of Kitchener are working very hard on facilitating this space, we're happy to kind of work out the logistics of what it means to share the wisdom from these group members and their stories with whatever municipality wants to use them. So I will, after this delegation, I'll send a copy of the delegate of what was shared today to everyone, and that will have also our contact info because we, as the working group, are very at the Social Development Center, are very happy to work out logistics on that.
Thank you. And if I may, Madam Chair, just as a follow-up comment, I've been looking at some of the smaller papers. So recent article about the city of Coburg, for instance, much smaller than Waterloo Region, suddenly finding themselves with 15 encampments. The little town of Exeter dealing with people living in tents. These are just a couple of examples of pretty well every municipality, rural and urban, across our province. And this is something that our provincial counterparts really have to step up to help resolve. You can't manage our social services and these supports through our property taxes. Thank you.
And I just had a question to the chair. I know that we still had 2 minutes left in our timeline, and I just received contact from the second delegate that they would like their poem to be read. If that is okay, if we could use the remaining time to read the poem that they prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, and so just to give you a little context, so this poem is written by one of our working group members who has been living in supportive housing, but their partner has been living in 100 Victoria, and so they have chosen to move partly to 100 Victoria to be with the relationship, because as we know, relationships and community are very important to people. So this is a poem that they wrote based off of their experience in 100 Victoria. I am Miss Melissa Marie. I have big dreams. Expropriation of property for the encampment. Everyone accounted for, dead, alive, and missing. Decriminalize homelessness now. Trust me. I put myself in 5 complete strangers. They said, we have a lot of energy with not a place to be. We have this for 5 years. It was a Thursday, the 4th of August, 2022. Police and security presence surround entire encampment. The bus sits, nobody in it. And go ahead and little by little change their world. Unspoken justice. I am calling this all housing, all justice, housing for all. And so what I think we're going to do is get Melissa to actually record a copy of that as well, so you can hear it in their voice. But I just really thought you all should hear their words from their experiences.
Thanks, David and Melissa. Great presentation. And I don't see any other questions, but we will look forward to hearing from you with the homework we've assigned. Thanks very much.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
I do just want to make one quick comment around the point-in-time count, and I know that everybody here knows this, but for perhaps media or others who are listening, the methodologies that were used in the last and the most recent point-in-time count were different methodologies. So I think that although I don't think anybody disputes that the numbers of unsheltered homeless people have certainly risen. That's not a question. I just caution media, particularly from against using those numbers as a proof, simply because the methodologies were quite different. All right, our next presentation, our next delegation is Rob Deutschmann from North Dumfries, and I see Rob. Hello, Rob. You have 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair Clark, Madam Regional Chair Redmond, Council and staff. I'm delegating today to speak in support of the Interim Housing Solutions Report and the recommendation of staff. I support the 4 points outlined as interim housing solutions. I do not have enough knowledge to express any opinion regarding the order. I support the Indigenous-focused approach. I also know comments in the record today from Commissioner Sweeney about needing to learn more, and I believe that is the right approach. We need to listen, as we just did, to those that are experiencing homelessness and find solutions and a response reflective of and tailored to their lived experiences. I'm encouraged to see the encampments have been included through the hybrid shelter outdoor model. I believe that encampments must be considered part of the housing continuum. Camping is a reality that is recognized by all. It's been happening for decades. We need to bring it out of the darkness, the deep recesses of our community, and into the light. Communities across our province, our country, and frankly, worldwide, as they are trying to confront a housing crisis, are seeing an increase in tenting as an option. For some, the only available option is a tent. No one wants to see their fellow citizen living in a tent. It breaks our hearts, but it is a reality. Just as we feel sad to see someone who is addicted to drugs and injecting themselves to feed their habit, we recognize that they need help. We develop safe injection sites so people can use drugs safely, and they are in an environment that can provide them with services when they are ready for help. Similarly, we would like to see people live safely, and for some, that is camps. The region has worked hard on this issue. There have been some missteps. The region has made good efforts in increasing available supply of affordable housing, but we need to deal with the immediate issues and needs at the other end of the housing continuum as well. We need to find ways for people to camp and tent and live outdoors in a safe environment. We all recognize that living rough is a reality. We need to focus on living safe. By providing safe spaces, we also provide access to services. We're in a better position to help our fellow citizens to access services and progress along the housing continuum to shelters and other options. And there will be some that will want to take advantage of the services being offered and some that will not want to. However, moving in this direction expands the opportunities for the region and social agencies to assist more people that are suffering homelessness for a wide variety of reasons. By recognizing camps as part of the housing continuum, it also gives the region time and opportunity to make more investments in shelters and other aspects of the housing continuum to allow people to feel more safe and secure moving through that continuum. This is also an all hands on deck issue, and that will require the participation and collaboration with cities. The region has resources, but the city has land. And we have a recent model to look at, like the Better Tent City model, even the tiny home takeout operated through St. Mary's Church. I recognize that we all need provincial and federal governments to assist with funding at some point, and I know we'll continue to advocate for that support with the other government. I recently taped an Old Grey Mayor's podcast with Chair Sealing, and we talked about the smoking bylaw. The smoking bylaw was an example where the Region of Waterloo moved forward when the province would not and led on this issue. Other municipalities followed, and eventually the province followed. The same can happen in this regard. You're the public health board for our community, and you got us through the most difficult times of the pandemic. I commend the recent comments that I've read from Commissioner Sweeney. The comments that I've read reflect what I feel is the Waterloo Region way, a compassionate approach to helping out our neighbors. We are judged by how we help the least among us. It harkens me back to another politician with a similar last name who I greatly admired for his compassion and commitment to our community. I'll just comment on one last thing. I'm somewhat discouraged the region took the step to bring this matter to the courts. It seems inconsistent with the compassionate approach. It ties up resources in a forum that provide little or no guidance on how this matter should be dealt with going forward, other than potentially removing people from their homes, perhaps forcibly. I believe it causes needless trauma and stress. It would seem that the efforts and resources would be better spent working with the cities to find spaces for the campers to live safely and to find a solution to the Victoria and Weber area that would allow for campers and the businesses and neighbors to coexist. Just as we worked out to ensure that consumption and treatment sites can exist in a neighborhood, we can do the same with Victoria and Weber and other locations. Thank you for the opportunity to delegate today on this important issue.
Thanks, Rob. Good timing. I am looking to see if there's any questions. And I see none. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you, and all the best to everyone in retirement. See you on a future Old Grey Mares podcast.
Thanks, Rob. Our next delegation is Heather Majaury. And there's Heather. Hi, Heather. You have 5 minutes.
Awesome. I have really messy notes here, so bear with me. And I'm going. Okay, so my name is Heather Majaury. Gabagate Iwasia Kondishnikas, Ampakananto Lake, Donjaba, Kitchener, Waterloo, Andayang. I'm a property owner in downtown Kitchener, and I also vote. And upon review of the report, I really do want to support and emphasize a housing rights approach. And I really believe that you should and would want to actually make that your formal framework rather than simply a recommendation. I also support sanctioning encampment lands now. And I also believe that we do need to take the proper steps to decriminalize homelessness in all of the different ways that we do it in this region. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, a daughter, a granddaughter, I'm an artist, a public educator, I've been a frontline worker, and I'm a researcher. I've experienced homelessness and housing precarity in my past, and I'm part of a citizens advocacy group called the Unsheltered Campaign. I live with a particular kind of liminalizing as an Indigenous woman, which has included experiencing precarious housing during my lifetime on reserve, where the water was so bad that we could neither drink it nor bathe in it. I've experienced relative poverty with precarious, unsafe housing while going to university as a first-generation post-secondary student. There was a loophole in a poorly written bylaw that allowed the landlord to allow a rat infestation that had happened for many, many years to not go unaddressed. The place was so unsafe that we had to abandon the place where we lived. It caused a 2-year extension onto my degree. So it cost a lot of money personally because of that 2-year extension. To me, bylaws do matter. They're not technicalities. They have influence. They have impact. They cause great harm when poorly written. Currently, the Region of Waterloo includes neo-vagrancy clauses in some of its bylaws. These can be used to criminalize homelessness if desired and when convenient. They can be used to justify surveillance and eviction. They can support a syndrome where homeless people are moved along rather than housed. This certainly has and is happening in downtown Kitchener where I live. No matter who says, oh, we don't enforce those laws. I say, then why are they on the books at all? Post-graduation of my first degree, I was housed in a women's shelter in my early 20s because of domestic violence. My housing became more and more precarious. I'm a single mother. My daughter's 26 years old. Yay. Rendered homeless when she was 5 weeks after I gave birth to her after 5 weeks. Forgive me, sometimes, even though I think I'm going to be smooth, when I do begin to talk about my personal lived experience, sometimes my words get a little jumbled. I think it has to do with trauma. And I'm a trained actor, so that's telling you something. In 2019, my husband and I personally housed a member of the local Indigenous community because this person was terrified to spend one more night in a shelter system where meth fentanyl crystals could be anywhere. These crystals can be absorbed by the skin. In a communal dorm-style environment, a person has no control over their space or even what touches their skin. They were terrified of unwitting contact with the substance, another reason why I am a fervent supporter of safe supply. And I see the need for drug-free shelters as well. When we attempted to seek housing supports for this person, we learned that the regional housing list was 7 to 10 years long. Really? We were told that it was the province, that provincial, they couldn't get housing because they had to fill out their taxes before they could qualify for housing. Really? Really? I just want to close. I had a lot more to say, and I did have actually even little details about what I thought might be improvements, and they're tiny, to the report, which I can send on to you. And I did want to say, please tax me more. Please expropriate dormant lands. Please require all large corporations to commit to supporting adequate housing. Please require the province and federal governments to stop creating barriers that reinforce homelessness as their housing plans moving forward. Chimigwech.
Thanks, Heather. That was excellent. I'm looking to see if there's any questions. And I don't see any. Please do send us those notes. And I'm going to repeat what Councillor Galloway said to our first delegation, or perhaps it was our second, I'm not sure. I do urge you to share these comments with the MPPs and MPs as well, because as has been noted by everybody today, this is going to take a lot of hands to wrestle this issue to the ground. Thank you very much. All right, I think we are now ready to hear the presentation from staff. I'm going to call on Peter Sweeney, Commissioner of Community Services, to give us that.
Good. Good morning, members of Regional Council here in the chamber with me and online. I'm here today with an imperfect offering. It is a response to the requests that you posed to staff back in June, and it is a response that we have taken seriously to dig into, not just as a regional staff, but with as broad and deep as a level of community engagement that time and resources provided us. It is a imperfect offering that is attempting to balance what we know to be some short-term acute needs in this community relative to homelessness, but also acknowledging the necessity of a long-term plan. Before I proceed, I would like to just thank all of the staff who dug in very deeply in some really deep and personal conversations. And I'd also like to thank the members of this community, two of whom delegated today, who gave generously of their time and their opinions to provide their feedback. It is my goal today to do my best to represent their collective views and thoughts and considerations as recommendations to Council. So, Aaron, if we could just move to the next slide. You have a more fulsome presentation in your package. It is not my intent today to walk through each of those slides. I'm going to spend a short period of time on an abbreviated version of that slide deck that is really rooted in the necessity of an all-of-community and all-of-government response. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is working and add into that the layers of some of our ongoing challenges, some of which are new and some of which are just being exacerbated, particularly through the COVID pandemic. I will ground ourselves again in the request that you posted to staff back in June. I will talk a little bit about the process that we undertook, and then I will close with a reiteration of those recommendations that you have in your package, and also touch on briefly the financial investments that would be required. Aaron. So What's working? I guess the short answer here is there's lots that's working, and it's still not enough. What I'd like to do before we move on is I want to give you a sense of what working feels like, sounds like, and looks like. And so I'm going to read a letter that we received from a person in this community that we have supported in finding permanent housing. I woke up this morning after deep and restful sleep. I was shivering because I forgot to turn the air conditioner off. I was so tired last night that I fell into bed at 8 and I didn't wake up until 11 hours later. I share all of that with you because I woke up feeling incredibly grateful and blessed to be living here. I am grateful for the accessibility of the unit. Not having to struggle with stairs or narrow doorways last night was such a blessing. I had no energy, so to be able to come in so easily meant that I could fall into bed. I slept so soundly because it's usually pretty quiet here. The location is perfect. I appreciate having central air conditioning so much. I suffered for years with pain because heat and humidity made my arthritis worse. Even without the air conditioning, I have found that the air cools down at night due to the open areas and the environment around this unit. The neighborhood is lovely too. I've been able to walk around exploring. It's flat with only a few hilly spots, and the neighbors are very friendly. All that and more has left me feeling incredibly grateful, so I just wanted to let you know that. I cannot thank you enough for offering me the chance to live here. It is more than I ever thought possible in a rental apartment that I would not normally be able to afford. I hope that more places like this will be built. If it's affordable, my hope is that all levels of government cooperate to create this type of affordable housing. So I will end there. Have a fantastic weekend. I know that I will. And one final comment. Meeting you and having you as a contact person is the icing on the cake living here. You're one of the nicest, friendliest, and most helpful people I've ever met. It's a pleasure knowing you are working on the behalf of people like me. So when it works, it works. And we need to recognize that that's the goal, is to find as many opportunities as possible to support people. I'm also cognizant that there's a letter in your package today from a man named Charles Nichols who admonishes us, and I take this personally, not to pat ourselves too hardly on the back for work that we are trying to do here. We have 10,000 units that we are supporting people to live in. We are on an ambitious plan to add 2,500, build 2,500 more affordable units. On any given night, we have 236 people on average who are accessing temporary emergency shelter. We have nearly 200 more people who are living in regionally sponsored, supported alternative housing, motels, and other places around the community. And on a daily basis, we work with our partners and through regional staff to provide outreach, to connect with people who are living and experiencing homelessness, to provide them the services that they need and that we have on offer. Aaron, move on to the next. So some ongoing challenges. None of this will be new to you. Our point-in-time count shows that over 1,000 people at last count were experiencing homelessness of some sort or another. At last count, we have 21 encampments across Waterloo Region that we know of. At last count, there's roughly 135 people living outside. At last count, 456 people in this community were experiencing chronic homelessness. I have no clinical experience in this area, but in all the conversations I've had with providers in the sector and the health system, I'm told that the acuity and level of mental health continues to grow. I'm told that the level and acuity of addictions continues to grow. And of course, we all know that there is a challenge around funding. That while the Region of Waterloo has a mandate in housing and homelessness, this is not a challenge that is the responsibility or even the purview of one level of government. We know that there are other conversations that need to happen, advocacy that needs to happen on the federal and provincial level. Aaron, can we move on? So to ground us and to remind where we're coming from, our starting point was the motion put forward by Councillor Verbanovic that said in part to direct staff to develop a plan to establish interim housing solutions for regional residents experiencing homelessness, including those currently living in encampments. So since you put this challenge to us as staff, we've undertaken a community engagement process. Aaron, if you could just move to the next slide, please. This community consultation process, again, like everything that's related to this work and this issue, is also imperfect and had its limitations, but we did our best. At a high level, regional staff met and we discussed a host of criteria that we felt that we needed to measure any solutions against. We then went through a process of identifying all the options at our disposal, whether they were currently in our toolkit or not. Not content with stopping there and bringing that work back to you, we committed to a community consultation process that was time-bound and resource-strained, but we did our best to reach out to as many people as we could who are connected through to the region, including those with lived experience, including those who actually are currently living in encampments. We included the significant feedback we've received from the business community throughout this community to receive their feedback. In a few of those consultations, we specifically walked through the criteria that we had proposed and the options that we had proposed and asked people to tell us, what do you like, what's missing, and how can we make this better? And so what you have today in front of you, the recommendations, is informed by that process. A note on the process. Some of you might know that at the invitation of Councillor Verbanovic, an international expert named Leilani Farha was in our community recently, and Councillor Verbanovic was kind enough to introduce me to Leilani, and we took that opportunity and we went out for a coffee at the end of her engagement, and we were just chatting about the work that was going on, the work that she has done around the world. And she asked me about the process. She was aware of what we were going through, this community engagement process. And I explained to her the work that we were doing. And she looked at me and she said, well, that process is in the human rights ballpark. And I asked her with a smile, I said, and what would put us at home plate? And she said, the only thing that would make this process better is if rather than coming up with criteria and options and consulting with those with lived experience, you would actually start with those with lived experience in the first part of the conversation. And I think we heard that from some of our delegates today. So the process concluded with a refinement of the criteria. Again, you will see in your package where the criteria started and how they were improved through community consultation. And then we also sought feedback on, given all the options that we could consider, in the short term, if we had to prioritize only a handful, where should we start? And that is what informs the second recommendation. Aaron, if we could just move to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about what we heard. Again, there's significant data points in your package, including quotes from those that we consulted with. But for me, I think my two biggest takeaways, and you heard this reiterated through the delegations today, is the importance of including those with lived experience and living experience, and not just as a point in time, but as an actual partner process in this process. We also heard from experts in the community about the need to consider ways to find housing and shelter space that are abstinence focused. I was quite shocked, to be honest, to learn from a community partner and expert in this field when they shared with us that there's a stat that 71% of those people experiencing homelessness have some form of acquired brain injury, and the complexity that brings to the work and to supporting those. We also heard loud and clear the need to ensure that there's an intersectionality with the health system. This is about work. Health policy is housing policy is social policy, and social policy and housing policy is also economic policy. To the next slide, Aaron. So recommendation number one, this is the strategy to have a plan, or the plan to have a plan. This is a recognition by regional staff and by our community that while we have a significant and ambitious 10-year housing plan, we need a coordinated and connected homelessness plan that at its root acknowledges that this is an all-of-community requirement and all-of-government response to end homelessness. A plan like this would allow for staff to have and use the direction set by council. It would allow us to streamline our resources, our time and attention, and it would allow us to build on the community engagement work that we've started in the last few weeks in a way that is much more comprehensive throughout, and to bring back to this council a plan that would, at its core and as its goal, seek to end homelessness in this community once and for all. Aaron? The second recommendation in your package for you to consider is a more short-term, immediate body of work that will begin, should council provide us this direction, would begin immediately. There, you will see that we started with, I think it was 8 or 9 options to consider that were tested against the criteria that we evolved throughout the process. And in those consultations, basically the question is, if we had to enhance and had to start somewhere, what parts of our toolkit would we pull out first? And this is a representation of where we would start. You will see that the first 3 are pretty obvious. They are enhancements of work that we're already doing. And of course, the fourth one represents a change in direction and a new tool in our toolkit. I've used that terminology quite a bit through the last 3 or 4 weeks because that's essentially what we're asking for direction for. What's in our toolkit as a staff to work with community to be able to address the ongoing challenges of homelessness. Aaron, the next slide. There is a number of slides in your presentation that speak to the financial investments required. I'm showing you here just one of those. My colleague Craig is beside me to answer any more specific questions around this. I want to make clear that this is an estimate of operational costs should we begin this work right away. That would take us to the end of the year. These would be unbudgeted costs and an estimate of operational cost for the 2023 budget year. We have not included any estimates around capital expenditures, and we have not made any estimates in terms of any additional staff time that would be required. Again, this is under the circumstances and the time and resources that we have at our disposal, we wanted to give you an order of magnitude in terms of what it would take from an operational perspective to move these particular recommendation number 2 forward. The final slide. So today we're here to recommend both a short and long-term set of recommendations for council to consider and to, should they choose to see fit in and moving forward with those recommendations, that work would begin. I want to reiterate that what is before you today is a collection and a comprehensive overview in a short period of time, rooted in the expertise of regional staff and the consultations with this community, those who are experts in the field, our business community, and those with lived experience. This requires a all of community, all of government response. And what is before you is the first step in moving towards that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Sweeney, and thank you to the staff who worked so hard and so quickly to bring us this.
There's a few hands up, it looks like.
There are a lot of hands up, and I suspect we'll see some of those hands reappearing once they've spoken once. And we're going to start with Councillor Barbanovich.
Thank you very much, Chair Clark, and thanks, Mr. Sweeney, for the presentation and for all of the work that's been done by the staff team since the June meeting to bring what I think is a very comprehensive initial start at this really important work. And while I at times in the past I've been a little frustrated in terms of how our response has been around some of these issues, I also have to acknowledge when clearly a good body of work has been done on this issue. And so I do want to thank staff in that regard. I do have a few questions, though, in terms of looking at these issues, and then later on we'll have some comments. But just on the, and it is a question I asked Mr. Alton when he was speaking as well. When we look at that list that's presumably in ranked order, one of the things that occurs to me when we look at the urgency of the problem, and I liken it to, you know, if we had a tornado come through the region, we would respond in some way. We would either put people in hotels, or we would look at creating some sort of, you know, temporary trailers or tents, and sort of make it happen, which is not unlike the managed site that and services that I think you're talking about. And so I'm just wondering around that being the fourth option on the list, because there is a matter of urgency right now. I mean, we know, I think the numbers you used were 135 people outside. I mean, I think it's probably larger than that when we just consider the ones that I know of in Kitchener alone, and certainly in talking with Mayor Majaury. You know, I know there's a lot in Cambridge and elsewhere. And so I'm just wondering whether or not that should actually be option number one, or at least happening concurrently with the other three.
Thank you, Councillor Banovic, for that question. To provide a bit of clarity, the recommendation would suggest, and that goes back to my analogy around the toolkit, the recommendation is intended to seek direction from council to allow us to put these four in our toolkit as our priority tools to respond to the current crisis of homelessness. They are not intended to be mutually exclusive from one another, and so we would be looking at deploying these concurrently and where appropriately. The reason why there is a order in the presentation is a reflection of community engagement and the criteria. So the fourth strategy is probably the quickest, but it doesn't always line up with some of the other criteria that's in your package around, you know, providing adequate support. It's not as safe as being inside in a lot of cases. So when we went through the process, the notion and idea and the request to build and find transitional housing was far and away from every group that we consulted with the number one way to move us through. So I don't want to leave the impression with you or with other council that we would tackle these in rank order in terms of get all of those in place and then move to the second one. This would be, again, the intention that all of these would be at our disposal. And all of them come with caveats. They come with caveats around access to capital, access to land, access to location, the ability and willingness of a provider. So this work all needs to start basically tomorrow if council so decides. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it's not, they're prioritized in a way that the community said, if we have to choose, these are the four in rank order, but we would be using them concurrently.
Okay, that's important to hear, because you know, as we know, I mean, Canada is, depending on where you sit on the weather spectrum, Canada is blessed with 4 seasons, and part of that is a very cold part of the year, and that's quickly approaching. And so I think it's going to be important that we ensure we can deal with it appropriately. When we look at the issue of costs, I know, you know, what's there is really looking at sort of what the costs going forward are estimated to be if we tackle these issues. But have we had any dialogue with our partners at the cities and at the townships around costs that they're incurring already in terms of dealing with some of these homelessness issues? So, you know, arguably the lower tiers, it's not, you know, it's not in our bailiwick in terms of what we need to deal with, but it is something that we're incurring expense in as well. Has that been looked at all yet? Or quite frankly, should it be something that's looked at because it'll actually help in building the case with our provincial and federal government counterparts around this issue?
So I can say, as it relates specifically to the financial considerations in this package, those types of additional costs in this particular case that you're referencing, savings from other levels of government have not been factored in. I do know we have those conversations with our municipal partners, and I agree that would need to be fully built into the Homelessness Master Plan, because I do believe there's a return on investment, not just a social return, but also a financial return. When I think about the ratio of expenses that we currently have within the region managing homelessness versus building housing, we want to get to a point where, if we eliminate chronic homelessness across this community, that ratio changes very dramatically. And we also know, in speaking with, business owners who are also struggling and challenged by this current situation, and I empathize with business owners who are coming out of a hard 2 years of a pandemic. And, the feedback I've had is, yes, it's rooted in some level and some frustration, but the feedback that I've received personally is we need to solve this. And so I think there's a whole host of ROIs that we can be developing, including some of the ones that you've referenced. But to be specifically clear, in this particular case in costing, that's those savings at other levels are not included.
Okay, and the last question I have, you've touched on it, the importance of working with the partners at the cities and townships, as well as other community partners on dealing with this. But particularly as we look at the notion of a managed site, one of the tools that potentially will be important is to look at the use of public use provisions. Particularly from a planning point of view. Have regional staff explored that as a tool to utilize in conjunction with our municipal partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we haven't done is made any assumptions on direction from council, but we have a pretty clear understanding of the tools at our disposal and some of the obstacles in the way that we would have to address. So yes, there are planning and zoning issues. There's also political will and the availability, of an adequate site for all of these particular options. So the answer is yes, we understand that there are those opportunities to move those forward, but we haven't put pen to pencil specifically related to this recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. And Madam Chair, at the appropriate time, I'd certainly be pleased to move this recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Wow. All those people, and I'm next. How wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks. I appreciate you recognizing me. I just have a couple of questions and maybe a bit of a follow-up. I think the whole idea of having a tenting option is a really good one. And I can tell you from past experience, there's good tents and there's bad tents. But Councillor Ivanovic touched on it a little bit. I'm more curious about using this form of accommodation. We can certainly move a lot quicker, but where are we at with when we're talking about a managed site? Are we looking at some kind of like a military style without fencing around it, but being able to save? And I think it's been raised in the past, if there was a huge natural disaster area, something like that would probably be set up to deal with that. Is that something that we're looking at? And how quickly are we prepared to move forward with this whole other option of a tenting site?
Thanks, Councillor Lorenz. So I maybe to answer your question, what I want to make clear for council today is hence there's a glossary of terms in the package. So when we talk about the hybrid option, it could include tents, it could include mobile trailers, it could include small structures. We haven't gone to the next level of working up specifically what would work in Waterloo region, but we do know in other communities around North America, there are hybrid versions to varying degrees of success that we would need to, really truly understand what would make most sense in Waterloo. So specifically, I can't tell you exactly what it would look like, but what we do envision, particularly related to this motion, and so again, so that there's clarity, is this would be a location to be determined that would require resources, willpower, and accommodations from the entire community that would be supported. And so when we talked about manage, we envision a scenario where we would have a community partner willing to staff and provide the services required and the amenities required on the site. I don't have any further details for you. I realize that is conceptual in nature, but what we've looked at is an option that would have access to those staffing resources. Much like we would in any other partnership, the difference here is rather than in a traditional building, in this strategy, people would be temporarily living in what we, alternative structures that could include tents, trailers, or small structures. The key here is, while the recommendations in front of you are not contingent upon one another, the reality is we have to ensure that any temporary interim solution is just that, and that they are tied into a longer-term homelessness master plan that seeks to end homelessness, so that we do not run into the unintended consequence of having temporary solutions that become long-term in nature. So, Councillor Lorentz, I can't give you specifically, what it would look and feel like, other than to be clear that this is something that would have staff support on an ongoing basis and the resources required on site.
Great. Well, welcome to the team, Peter. I haven't had a chance to sit down and shake your hand, but you're a welcome addition. And I'm sure living in this community the length of time that you have, you probably realize that we're really good talkers. We talk about a lot of stuff, and we say, this is what we'd like to do, and this is what we should do, and this is what would be nice to be able to do. And I think this is an important issue where we cannot just talk about it anymore. We have to move forward and get some concrete ideas and start making a difference. One of the concerns that I have is, by chance we do get it right, is there a real opportunity for other people to come from other parts of Ontario and Canada? Because Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, the region has gotten it right, and there's an opportunity for us to go to someplace better. Have we looked at this at all, or are we not concerned about that?
No, I know it's something that I've thought about. It's something that I've had conversations with staff about, and it's something we'd have to be super intentional around in building a homelessness master plan. And again, looking at other communities around North America and the world in particular, who are potentially ahead of us on this curve. My hope, Councillor Lorentz, would be if we find a way to eliminate and solve the issue of chronic homelessness in this community, other folks in positions of influence and authority and those with lived experience would potentially look at what we're doing here as a learning for others, just like we're learning from other communities as well. But I do take your point, and it has been something that we've acknowledged internally and would have to be reflected in our long-term plan.
Last quick question. I know that you're not trying to avoid the answer, but I think it's something that we would certainly like to hear is, where do we go from here and how quickly can we get there? Do you have any kind of timelines where, we can have something underway before the snow falls? I think it's great to talk about all these things, but I think people that are in these situations need to have some hope on something is going to happen and how quickly it can happen. So I don't know if you have the answer today, but as I said earlier, we talk about stuff a lot, but trying to find some concrete solutions and putting the proof in the pudding is very important to me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My answer to that is that this will not be solved overnight, that we don't have a magical site and a big bag of cash, that we're just waiting to pull out. When I talk about all of community and all of government, we mean that. This is certainly a mandate that we have as a regional staff and as regional council, but it is not ours alone to tackle and to solve. And I agree with you, we need to put actions into place. What I can assure you is with the current funding allocation and the current mandate, we have 1,000 people who are experiencing homelessness, half of whom are experiencing chronic homelessness. So unless we change something up there, we should expect that to continue. And so the sooner we both respond in the short term and develop a master plan, the better off. And ideally, Councillor Rentz, if in the next cycle of government between now and the next election, if we're here and I'm still talking about this, then I won't feel good about that.
One last comment, Madam Chair. As a member of the steering committee for LRT from start to finish, I think all of us were surprised at the success, the development along the line has taken. There is a huge number of private sector companies that have done really, really, really well. And I think we're maybe barking up the wrong tree. I think it's great to go after the other levels of government, but I think we need to come up with a made in Waterloo region solution. And that is to get some of the private sector developers who this problem they see every day. They know it's a real problem. Everybody seems to. But I think there's an opportunity for them as well to get involved and to offer not only their expertise, but their cash as well. Because this is a crisis in our community, and it's not just for a certain group of people. It's a crisis for all of us, and I think that's something that we may be missing. And I think it would behoove us to not approach the home builders or whatever the latest association is of these people that are building these huge developments along the LRT. But I think it's time for them to open up their wallets as well and see if they're part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lorenz. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair, well done, Peter. But as I agree with a lot of what Councillor Lorenz said. We've had some great words around this table. It's getting the action going. That's essential. You said something that I missed in your report when you said 71% or 70% of something. What was that?
Oh, thank you. That was in one of our community consultations, we heard from a community partner who referenced a statistic that suggested that 71% of those people who experience homelessness also have some version or some sort of an acquired brain injury. And the caution from this community partner was these particular clinical conditions require specific and dedicated resources. In other words, the complexity and the acuity of the challenges faced by people experiencing homelessness is complex, and that we need to be thinking about other clinical conditions that often are associated and come with living homeless.
Oh, thank you. The other thing I was going to talk about as well was the hybrid model, but you answered that for Councillor Rent. And the third one I was going to talk about was corporation involvement. Not just financial, but some of them may actually have available land, have available trailers or types of housing that we could look into. Made in Waterloo Region solution doesn't mean Waterloo Region Council has to be the total solution, as we're well aware. That with our partnerships, we become amazingly strong and set the bar for the rest of the country. So you may want to add on in your points, seeking corporations and those willing to get involved. And I think you'll be surprised at the amount of people do, because the hearts in this region are amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foxton. I would add that, when I talk about all of community, I mean all of community. And, I've only been in this role for a handful of weeks now, and some of the examples that I've seen across North America, across the world, look very lateral in their thinking and the engagement. It is obviously, a mandate of regional council and regional staff and regional government, but that doesn't mean that we should and always lead every conversation. I think what we're hearing from our community consultations is that we need to walk with people rather than worrying about doing for. So I think that includes those with lived experience, but the entirety of this community. Thank you.
Councillor Erb.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the presentation to Mr. Sweeney and staff. And when you're ready, I'd be prepared to second the motion that Councillor Vanderbeek wants to move. I have a couple of questions. The first one is related to finances. Big ticket items, all not allocated in any of our budget. And so I'm wondering, does Mr. Dyer continue to going to wave his magic wand to find this money for us and some of the funds that we have, or what's the thinking on how we're going to fund this? I guess is my first question.
You want to take that, Craig?
So through you, Madam Chair. No magic wand, unfortunately, Councillor Erb. As we've indicated in the slide deck that was circulated with the agenda, we're looking at this from, I guess, from a couple of perspectives. One is, what's the source of funding that we would look to get us through to the end of this year? Because as Mr. Sweeney correctly indicated, these would be unbudgeted costs associated with any of these strategies that are put forward, that are implemented over the course of the next 4 or 5 months. So we do have a few potential sources of funding to look for in 2022, including some uncommitted COVID funding that we have remaining, looking at the planned expenditures with respect to the strategic investment in affordable housing, as well as the equity and inclusion budget allocation. Failing any of those, we do have the tax stabilization reserve that we can look to, and I think this will all depend perhaps on the speed of implementation and the extent of expenditure that would be incurred between now and the end of the year. I think the bigger challenge for us from a budget and financial perspective is an ongoing source of funding. As we've indicated in, I think, a number of reports over the course of this year on this topic, in the absence of any additional or incremental, rather, provincial funding, the cost of these programs will need to necessarily fall to the property tax levy. And we've already given some indication of what the 2023 budget looks like, so I can't say at this point that there's really any other source going forward. If we're unable to get additional funding from the province, we'll have to figure out a way to incorporate this into our 2023 tax budget.
Another question, if I may, Madam Chair. I know the levy for 22, half of it went to developing new housing and half of it went to funding some of the extra services required for the point in time count. That extra half levy, if we continue that levy into 23, do we still need that 0.5 to fund the other expenditures from the point in time count? Is that ongoing, I guess, is my question.
So through Madam Chair, I think that's definitely something that we can look at as we put the 2023 budget together. And I think, as your final comment there, I think it all depends on the planned expenditure and programs that we intend to fund using that money. So, for example, I mentioned before, looking at the strategic investment in affordable housing, if that's where that funding was intended to be this year, we can look at the extent of expenditure and see if there's any capacity there. Looking ahead to 2023, I think it's going to come down to the overall range of housing and homelessness programs that staff are going to recommend. There may be some capacity within that 0.5% that was added this year. I think that's something we'll look at as we put the 2023 budget together.
Okay, thank you. And my final comment would be to Mr. Sweeney, and this Mr. is going to be hard to get used to, Peter, in a variety of forms, we've had working groups working with community providers and those with lived experiences. I hope that the framework that you put together in developing this plan is something that can be continued with community consultation, that it becomes part norm of how we work through some of the issues dealing with the homelessness and the encampment and the shelter system. So I hope that can continue. And my final on this particular thing would be, while the price tag is big, we can't afford not to do it simply for the improvement in quality of life that these people deserve, and for other savings in the long-term social determinants of good health. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, for sure. Some of the feedback we actually received through our community consultation is how we could actually improve it. And again, we tried to do the best we could in a 3-week period and recognize some limitations to it. And our goal would be that the development of a master plan would have community consultation at the heart of it. And then secondly, to build on what you had just mentioned and what my colleague Craig beside me also mentioned in terms of costing this out. The other benefit of a homelessness master plan is we can actually start taking a sort of a business case approach to being able to track the investments and seeing over time how investments in early and intervention of homelessness that leads to housing can actually have a positive benefit both from a social and an economic perspective.
Not to break the flow of the questions, but I've just noted that this there's actually 2 recommendations here, and I just want to confirm with Councillors Verbanovich and Erb that they are moving and seconding both of the recommendations. Thank you. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you, Chair Clark. And thank you, Mr. Sweeney, for the presentation, and to our delegates as well. And I recognize that what we're doing here is sort of emergency work with housing, but the comment, and Councillor Foxton mentioned it too, that 71%, someone's observation anyway, that 71% of the homeless have some kind of acquired brain injury, made me think again of the Elmira District Community Living Model. And while that's not something you can implement to take care of an emergency situation, I've talked about it before, and I think it's something that we really need to put in our toolkit and look at that. It's self-sufficient once the buildings are there. And of course, it doesn't speak to everyone who is needing homes, but it certainly addresses a certain population, and it's worked extremely well for them. So I wanted to bring that forward. And also, maybe Mr. Sweeney, can you just speak to how the House of Friendship piece that's opening this fall will fit into the bigger picture?
Yeah, certainly. So that would be those beds that are coming online later this fall would be included in our work to address the acuity of the current situation. We are in constant conversations with the House of Friendship around the implementation of that model. I believe there's 80 beds? 80. So there would be an immediate influx of 80 beds into the system, but we also have challenges around our current shelter capacity and some fluctuations within that. So it's not a straight net benefit of 80 if we continue to have some challenges around the emergency shelter program. So certainly it will help both from a capacity perspective into the system, Councillor Shantz, but also in the type of work that will be undertaken there at the new shelter care on Weaver Street.
And if I could have just one more question, and I'm not sure if you have the answer to this, but you know, as we work through the master plan and the whole housing and homelessness issue, how much will we have to ramp up social services to also support that? Do we have a sense of that, or will that be part of the master plan analysis?
I will defer that to the master plan analysis, as I don't have a really good, solid answer for you, but recognizing the work of the staff and community services is integrated as much as possible. And so, as you know, we work with our colleagues in income support and OW on a daily basis. They're out in the community on our behalf every day. So certainly that will be factored into it. Thank you.
Councillor McGarry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for a pretty sobering presentation. I think it's very helpful to have everything laid out here, not just for our regional council, but really to have on record for the entire community. This is an issue that's top of mind for literally everyone, residents, those that are vulnerable in the camps, our businesses, our politicians, pretty well everyone. It's a top priority. And yet here we are sitting with a regional level of government in a province where it's unique in Canada that most other provinces in Canada, as you said in the presentation, fund programs such as income support, childcare, public health, senior services, housing, and homelessness from provincial revenues. And so it's very sobering to sit and look at the incredible cost that's important to get our vulnerable citizens out of tents and into adequate supported housing as need be. So the issue for me is, how do we make a deal with the province, starting at AMO, in order to help fund these things? The more often we are then solving these issues through property tax and user fee revenue, which is what our budget is depending on, the more the province turns its head and continues down their path without recognizing that all municipalities in Ontario are dealing with this. And although there's no adequate answer to this just yet, I do want to make those points that here we are trying again with revenues that we don't have enough monies for in order to try and solve an incredibly complex and costly program. You talked again about a health issue and acquired brain injury. And I think for the general population, this is something I saw when I was in the medical field, in the emergency, pediatric, and the intensive care units around the GTA in my nursing career. Acquired brain injury can be something like fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which is unrecognized by many, that don't have similar features that would be recognizable. And I think we see this in the report that was given to the province of Ontario through consultation across the province in the previous government, where even our schools and our youth detention centers were packed with people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and acquired brain injuries. So this is part of the health-related issues that we see in our encampments, and for those that are vulnerable and can't seem to manage without supports, to have it so that they can not only obtain housing but actually indeed keep the housing. I think part of the issue that we're looking at is the supports that are paid for by the provinces to ensure that those that do attain housing can keep the housing. Recently, I spoke to the executive director of the Cambridge Food Bank, who talked about a story of a person in our community that had gotten affordable housing 3 times and failed to keep that housing through lack of supports. This isn't an uncommon story. And I also wanted to say too that as much as you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. And I know that our outreach workers, our regional employees have gone out to the encampments to try and find solutions for individuals, whether it's a shelter or an affordable house or transportation back and forth between cities, even daily, in order to try and take advantage of a shelter bed. And yet the individuals that they're speaking with would not prefer to take those options. And I think that, in this long commentary from me means that, yes, we are looking at different options for housing that might work for individuals, but ultimately there are many in the encampments right now that will not or have not and are not going to take us up on the offers that we have. I think that the staggering costs that we're facing is very helpful for those of us that are heading into AMO next week, so that we actually have sort of a basic overview of what the beginning of this journey that we're on to try and resolve our homeless issues here in the region will cost in order to try and make an indent in the future. So I think there are certainly other solutions. Going back to one of my colleagues, and I can't remember who it was that was talking about, maybe it was Councillor Brent's, about some of the organizations, companies, businesses that we have in our Waterloo region. And I did want to point out that Amazon recently contributed to Habitat for Humanity almost $500,000 to help the builds that they're doing in Waterloo region. So I think that's something that we're asking, but this is an all of community, all of business, all of government solution. And I'd rather see us all continue to work at the same table so that we can really address these issues. I really appreciate the several slides here that will certainly be in the discussion phase that I have when we're meeting as a city and as a region and big city mayors with the provincial ministers next week at AMO. But I guess my last real comment and then a question is that with all of the other needs that we see in our community, we've been looking at the tax increases that we're facing as a region, as Mr. Dyer pointed out, to manage some of our top priorities, which is also adding to paramedics services, adding new ambulances, adding new services that have to sort of deal with some of the issues that we're seeing in mental health, addictions, housing, some of the other social services that they see. So I guess my question, Peter, is that are we able as a region to maybe co-lead or lead a roundtable with all of our government partners in order to see what the actual cost is, not just to Waterloo region, but other municipalities that are trying to pay for some of these services out of their property taxes, and see if we can maybe even have a document that's province-wide in order to really take before our provincial and federal counterparts?
Thank you, Councillor Majaury. I think conceptually, yes, based on the conversations that I've had with our staff in housing here at the Region of Waterloo, I can tell you they are a passionate, hardworking, and dedicated group of people. And if given the chance to end homelessness and do that work here in Waterloo region, that could also be influence this issue around Ontario across the country, I'm certain that most of them would jump at that opportunity to be part of that. So I can take that back. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to thank Mr. Sweeney, Mr. Petitpierre, all our partners, and those with lived experience that have so diligently and expeditiously brought forward this report in its form, but also in the time frame that was given. It's really a monumental effort to do that, and so I want to express that appreciation and thank them for the various recommendations, which of course I will support. As Councillor Erb said, we really can't afford not to do these things, not from a financial point of view, but from a quality of life and humanity point of view. I want to comment particularly about the managed outdoor site or option that's part of the the various options that are to be worked on. And I want to particularly note in regards to that, Mr. Sweeney's comments about this is a temporary this is a temporary situation, and it's not to become permanent. And I certainly concur with that, because the outdoor option should not be seen as a permanent option. And I don't know how we manage that or that expectation over a long period of time. And I'm not sure what the long period of time is, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or less. But I do remember when food banks were first brought into existence as a temporary measure. I remember when, I guess it was before my time, an income tax was brought in as a temporary measure. And these things, of course, have been institutionalized over time out of necessity and need and so on. And I guess the concern I'm expressing is how will we transition out of that particular option once it's in place, and does it become permanent? A couple other concerns that I wanted to ask about is, and it does relate, this concern relates a lot to what Councillor Majaury indicated in terms of a provincial strategy. Because if we implement this strategy, which I think we're likely to at least embark on, will our success become part of its downfall? Because there's no provincial strategy. So that we have some better options in our community than they do in neighboring communities. And people migrate to other communities. Indeed, there are communities that buy bus tickets for people to move them to another community. And how might we be able to manage that piece if that's been anticipated? I know I've had a personal conversation with Mr. Neufeld of the House of Friendship in regards to the facility that they'll be opening in the fall. In that respect, how do we manage that so that we just don't attract more and more people from other communities to facilities that might be somewhat better than they may have in their home communities? And I don't want that to sound bad, but without a provincial strategy, what happens? And that's why I bring that up. And I don't know if Mr. Sweeney has any response to that or not, if that's been anticipated, or something to be looked at, once we start getting into the implementation phase.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Galloway. It's weird to not look at you when I speak, but yeah, certainly I think there was a previous question that was along similar lines. The data that we have now would suggest that that's not something we're seeing a lot of in terms of people coming into this community. But that's not to say that isn't a potential unintended consequence of any regional strategy in the absence of a provincial strategy. And so my overarching response to that is, again, the necessity for a plan. So the challenge that we sometimes run into here in this community, and I suspect in a lot of communities, is, we get into a small crisis, then it's a big crisis, and we respond and we put a Band-Aid on it, and we don't actually address some of the root causes and some of the root work. So I think that that challenge around the temporary nature of it is, I think those things tend to happen when you haven't at least sort of thought through in terms of how you're going to transition them from temporary into permanent housing. And, call me naive at this point, Councillor Galloway, but, if the goal of a master plan in homelessness is to eliminate the existence of chronic homelessness in this community, a whole host of things that we're currently doing are no longer necessary. And I think we just have to be intentional about how a homelessness master plan and a housing plan come together, and what those metrics and timelines need to be. And then the second thing is, if I can be, not facetious, but, to put it to you and the rest of council, regional staff, we have the mandate and the resources that you direct to us, and we go about doing the best we can to solve the challenges that exist in our community. One of the biggest things that council can do on a political level is to advocate on behalf not only of the people who live here, but the people doing the work at a provincial level. So I'm not abdicating and kicking the provincial advocacy piece back to you and other councillors, but there's certainly, to go back to all of government, all of community response, that has to be included as part of the work.
Thanks for that, Mr. Sweeney. Two other things, Madam Chair. The first thing I would say, and this again is in agreement with Councillor McGarry's comments, is I guess I could say, here we go again in terms of backstopping the province. I've been around long enough to know how we backstop discretionary benefits. I've been around long enough to know how we have backstopped childcare with property taxes, and we're probably today at least setting a path towards backstopping housing and homelessness with property taxes as well. And so I hardly endorse what Councillor McGarry is getting at in terms of lobbying with the provincial government to take seriously their responsibilities in these program areas, which property taxes were not really intended for. But I think, as Councillor Erb indicated, that we really can't afford not to. And the last thing I wanted to mention, and I do this with some reservation, Mr. Dyer, but this would not be, these costs would not be what I would normally think would be appropriate for the Upstream Fund. And we're going to be dealing with the Upstream Fund later today. But my anticipation is that we will be unlikely this year to spend the money in the Upstream Fund. There's over $2 million and only a few months in which there's a fair bit of process ahead of us to establish the criteria and the methodology to use that money. But I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility. I'd like to that money that may not be spent in that account might be something, at least for this year only, might help. And I don't know, Mr. Dyer has a comment in that regard or not.
Certainly, and through you, Madam Chair, it is one of the options that we considered in our initial look at how the 2022 costs might be funded. I think from a staff perspective, our initial thought was that it didn't really, or perhaps didn't adequately meet the criteria, if you will, for Upstream.
I agree entirely. It does not.
It's not out of the question. You know, we can certainly take another look at it. I don't think it will be high on our list, but certainly if we think we need to go down that path, then we'll bring that recommendation back to council.
Yeah, I don't want to leave the impression that I think that these kind of costs, as legitimate as they are, really qualify for the kinds of things at least I anticipate in the Upstream Fund. But I only mention it because it's unlikely we're going to spend the Upstream Fund this year. And that could contribute to, you know, a surplus or, you know, a bottom line number at the end of the year, whether or not you designate it coming from the Upstream Fund. Or the other possibility, I suppose, is to carry over any unspent money from the Upstream Fund into a subsequent year as well, which would not necessarily be a bad thing either. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks. I'll come to you, Councillor Fox, in just momentarily, but I did just want to make one comment reflecting on the issue of encampments and how they do need to be seen as a very temporary and emergency response. I did have the opportunity to also meet with Leilani a couple of weeks ago, and I asked her specifically where she saw encampments fitting in this human rights approach to housing, and she was very clear that she saw them fitting at the very bottom. She said a person in an encampment is still homeless. That being said, to the extent that supports and safety are provided, it could be better than being homeless outside of an encampment. And she still thought that it had, it was somewhere on that continuum, but it was only marginally better than simply being on the street. So I don't think we can congratulate ourselves too much about, we need to have it in the toolkit, absolutely, because of where we are right now, but we should not be looking at this as any sort of long-term solution. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in response to Councillor Galloway and Councillor Majaury's comments, I see meeting with the province and delegating to the province or creating a working group as a parallel process. I would not want to in any way stop or slow down the process that we're starting here. Should we be successful and possibly end up drawing more homeless people, as Councillor Galloway hopes doesn't happen, I think that rather than drawing more people, that we will be a benchmark for the other communities surrounding us wanting to use our model. And I think that Waterloo Region isn't the only place that cares. I think Guelph, Brantford, the rest of them care just as much. And if we have a model that's starting to work, that they will implement a similar model in their jurisdictions so that we do move forward and end homelessness across this nation. Working with the upper levels of government, I think we may even shame them into being more active because of what we are doing. And rather than hesitate, I say full speed ahead, and I'm proud of our action. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair Redmond, and I think you have the last word.
Thank you, Chair Clark, and I will be quick. I think that the conversation today has been thoughtful and productive, and thank all my colleagues and to you, Peter, and staff for doing a whole lot of heavy lifting in a very short period of time. My comments are almost similar to Councillor Foxton's, which is governments like it when you go to them with solutions. So the first recommendation about looking at a master plan that involves people with lived experience, people in the business community, developers, and that whole broad spectrum, I think will land us in a place where we are able to say, provincial government, federal government, we need X and Y. To talk about it being an all-of-community response is absolutely bang on, but if we can come to them with specifics, I think they will listen to us, because it isn't just about money, it's also about breaking down those silos within the provincial government and sometimes the federal government. There's a difference between being a service manager and a service provider, and I really want to thank Councillor Galloway for using discretionary benefits and childcare as times where we did step in and then were heavily criticized when there was new information or different contexts within which council had to make decisions about how we funded competing needs. And Councillor Clark, I really appreciate your comment about sanction encampments as being something incredibly temporary. And I think that as we investigate that on a go-forward basis, I also think of a Better Tent City and how the region and the City of Kitchener have supported a Better Tent City. And it seemed like every year we were looking for a new piece of property. And just to reiterate that the Region of Waterloo owns no piece of land that does not reside in an area municipality. So it will be absolutely essential as we go forward in that piece that we work with area municipalities to make sure that this isn't something that they're not buying into too. So great recommendations. There is no quick fix. If there was, somebody else would have come up with it, or we would have, because we have amazing staff and a really committed community. So I look forward to seeing this unfold, and I think the recommendations are really, really appropriate.
Thank you. And Councillor Vanovich is moving this motion, but I'll let him speak.
Thank you very much, Chair Clark, and really robust discussion amongst our colleagues today around this issue. And thank you to the delegates that not only came today, but those who participated in the process over the last while. I think the recommendations that are before us, it's still morning, certainly speak to the urgency of the unsheltered crisis within our region, and has put on the table a number of options that perhaps we haven't considered to the same degree in the past as we are today. And I really applaud staff for the work that they have done collectively with our community partners to get to this point. As I said on the radio this morning, I think it's important for us to remember the human approach to all of this, and to take a human rights-centered approach in terms of dealing with this issue. Because fundamentally, the people that we're talking about are sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles of people in our community. In fact, at times, some of us may actually know some of these individuals or know the families that they belong in. And it's important that we always look at it with that lens, not unlike how we looked at things like the CTS site and other difficult issues that our community is facing. I'm particularly pleased to see the master plan as the basis of this work, because I think it is going to be important for many of the reasons that have been outlined, not the least of which is to help strengthen our advocacy position with the other orders of government that do have primary responsibility, particularly from a funding point of view, the federal government from a capital point of view, and the provincial government from an operating point of view in terms of dealing with homelessness and dealing with the many medical issues, mental health, addictions, and so on, that are often associated with homelessness. I'm pleased to see us looking to grow the transitional housing model. We've seen how that worked with shelter care, which was something that was originally piloted during the pandemic, and we know is going to be opening up in Waterloo later this year in partnership with the House of Friendship, as well as looking at a managed hybrid shelter outdoor model, not unlike perhaps something like a Better Tent City or some different version of that. And I know there are groups in the community who I've met with who are already looking at the possibility of being a partner in terms of a second edition of that. I think the other thing that, and we heard from this group today, that we need to continue to ensure stays at the forefront is the involvement of lived experience as we continue to move forward in this work. And I do in particular want to thank David and our City of Kitchener Lived Experience Working Group that were part of the process, but also all of the others that met with staff. I think there are a couple of key points as we go forward that need to stay at the forefront as we do this work. And I was encouraged by Chair Redmond's comments. Early and open dialogue with the cities and townships, with our staff and our councils, is going to be important on a regular basis, because the reality is that the first line of response, often where the complaints first get heard, are, as my colleagues who sit around this horseshoe, who are mayors at the cities and townships, know, is at the municipal level. And that's where we end up often having to deal with the first aspects of homelessness, and yet we're the order of government that have the least ability to impact or fund it in terms of our budget. So that dialogue will be incredibly important. It'll also be important to ensure that the programs that we develop are equitably distributed throughout the region, recognizing that there's needs throughout the region and wanting to ensure that all portions of the region are part of the solution going forward. In terms of the managed hybrid shelter, I was encouraged by Mr. Sweeney's response, because I think with winter coming and recognizing that things such as the transitional housing program, often may take a little more time because it involves renovations, acquisition, whatever the case is. Ensuring that we're doing work on the hybrid model at the same time is going to be key to make sure that we're ready for the winter. And lastly, I think it's important that we remember that we don't have a one-size-fits-all model as we go forward. We know from the work that we've done and from the things that we've heard, low barrier is important, harm reduction, safe supply focus is important, addressing complex needs of individuals is important as we go forward. And the challenges of folks having to move on every day versus, facilities that have 24-hour wraparound supports as we go forward. And lastly, a key part of this is going to be communications, developing a broad education and communication strategy with the community. Because I think as any of us who have had these conversations with residents know, it's not the kind of thing you can fit in, 110 characters or 240 characters or, even in a paragraph or two. They're complex issues that take a lot of communicating, and we need to work on that as a region, as lower tier municipalities, and quite frankly, making sure that our provincial and federal partners are doing the same. At the end of the day, what I think all of us are striving for is ensuring that we have safe places for individuals who are currently homeless, getting them on the path to the housing need, the permanent housing that they need, in a way that balances their needs with a human rights-centered approach with the needs of the rest of the community going forward. And I think today we're taking an important next step in that journey, but it's certainly not the final step. And as we've heard, there's going to be a lot more work that needs to get done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Majaury, and then I am going to go to the vote because this is the first item on the agenda for today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak one last time and really back up what my other colleagues are saying. I think on this regional council, heads of council, as well as the directly elected councillors that are represented in our region, are incredibly kind, caring, very committed people to serving the needs of all of our vulnerable. And aren't we fortunate to have incredible staff that have brought this forward and have been so eloquent at not just looking at dollars and cents and spaces and places, but looking to the needs of our vulnerable community who cannot speak for themselves. And indeed, that's what I think all of us are in public service for, is in order to be that voice for people that can't speak for themselves. And boy, we hear it reflected back in the staff that go out and do this very important work. So I'm incredibly proud to be with all of you as we're making an important decision. I also just wanted to weigh in with a possible solution too. This is a main topic of conversation. There's many inaccurate judgmental statements that are out in the media. Perhaps going forward as we roll out a master plan and roll out this work, maybe we could have one button on our regional website that we can send any questions to, so that they can see the level of governments, what they're responsible for, what our staff is doing, what kind of need there is, what kind of costs are behind this, what we're doing on the advocacy piece, maybe a place where we could put some of those letters and emails and communications that we have with upper levels of government. I think that would be helpful because as we've been talking here, I've had a couple of emails in from people in Cambridge that want to make sure that they're at the table too, because there's many of our folks in encampments and vulnerable in Cambridge that won't cross that 401 divide to access services only in Kitchener-Waterloo areas. So I think it's incumbent upon us to ensure that not only the urban cores, but our townships are very well reflected in the work that we're about to undertake, and to ensure that that's at the forefront of our discussions with upper levels of government. And I think that I agree with Councillor Galloway. We are backstopping them in the provincial government, and we need to continue that advocacy so that we can get things properly funded. In the long run, it's all of our goals to prevent this happening in the first place. But let's get to resolving some of the issues and ensure that we've got the housing options and the options of different supports that will ensure that each unique with their individual needs can be addressed and assisted in this incredible caring region that we call home. I fully support these recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you.
Chair Clark, could I just...
Sorry. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair Clark, just one thing quickly dawned on me, and I just want to make sure this isn't going to be an issue. This doesn't come back to council until the 24th when we're in the lame duck period, and I just want to make sure that staff have thought about that and there won't be any issues around that.
I'm told it's returning on the 18th.
Okay, great,
Our special
thank you.
meeting. Thanks for clarifying that, because we would have wasted 2 hours and 15 minutes of conversation. All right. Sorry. Go ahead, Mr.
If I
Cheney.
could, through you, Madam Chair, just address the last comment by Councillor Majaury. The report, as it's written, was very intentional in its scope, and that it didn't and was not intended to be focused on the acuity of any one situation in any one community within the Region of Waterloo. It is intended to be an all of Region of Waterloo response, and I just want to make sure that that's clear going forward
thank
for
you.
all of council.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think the amount of airtime that's gone into the 100 Vic encampment has sort of led some people to think that that's what we're talking about instead of just being a piece of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
And a request for a recorded vote. The first recommendation is that the Regional Municipality of Waterloo direct staff to develop a homelessness master plan detailing the strategies and resources necessary to end homelessness in the Region of Waterloo. That's moved by Councillor Rabanovich and seconded by Councillor Erb.
Madam Chair, I'm okay with doing the two together so that you don't have to do a vote.
All right, I will vote. I will. Thank you. I'll do that. Do we have a dissenter here? In that case, if you don't mind, I will just read the second one as well. That the Regional Municipality of Waterloo authorize staff to prioritize and implement interim housing solutions to support those experiencing homelessness in the Region of Waterloo in the following order. 1, expansion of the transitional housing program, including an Indigenous-focused and led site. 2, expansion of the home-based support program. 3, expansion of the emergency shelter program. And 4, permit a managed hybrid shelter / outdoor model. So I don't see any objections to combining them. And then we'll proceed with a recorded vote on both motions.
Regional Chair Redmond.
In favor.
Councillor Vavanovic.
In favor?
Councillor Jaworski.
In favor.
Councillor / Chair Clark.
In favor.
Councillor Lorenz.
In favor.
Councillor Jowett.
In favor.
Councillor Erb.
In favor.
Councillor Nowak.
In favor.
Councillor Kiefer.
In favor.
Councillor Majaury.
In favor.
Councillor Armstrong.
In favor.
Councillor Harris is not with us. Councillor Shantz.
In favor.
Councillor Foxton.
In favor.
Councillor Galloway.
In favor.
All right, and that is approved unanimously. Thanks to everyone. I've already thanked staff, but thanks to council as well. I know this has been a huge struggle for us, including emotionally and personally. So I'm really pleased to see that we've got to what seems like a bit of a resolution, if only an interim one. We're now on to the consent agenda items. If you wish to remove an item from the consent agenda, please indicate so now, as we will not take questions on consent items unless items are requested to be moved to the regular agenda. The items listed on the consent agenda will be dealt with in one motion. Are there any items that you wish to have removed from the consent agenda? And I don't see any hands, so we will, I need a mover and a seconder. And I have Councillor Galloway and Councillor Foxton, and please use your yes or no items to vote that the consent agenda items be received for information and approved. That's unanimous. That's carried. And now I will leap ahead. So we're the regular agenda items. Am I in the right place? The first agenda item is thriving economy. We do not have a presentation on the Region of Waterloo licensed home childcare parent fee reduction, but we do have staff to answer questions if there are any. All right, and I see none. I hear whispering. I see none. So please use your yes or no button to vote. Oh, sorry, I need a mover and a seconder. And I have Chair Redmond and Councillor Shantz. And this is a motion to amend the fees and charges bylaw as of September 1st to reflect the 25% reduction in parent fee rates for the Region of Waterloo's licensed home childcare program. And that is carried. Thank you. Nice to see us making some progress on that one too. Yes. Okay. Do they? Okay. Oh, I see. It's easier to just look around the table. All right, and now we are on to the Upstream Fund update, which was previously mentioned, and I think Fawzia Beg, oh, I see you, is here with us to provide the presentation.
Thank you, and well, I started with good morning, but now I'll say good afternoon almost. Just going to share my screen. I do have a few slides I'd like to share today. Just give me 1 second. Hello everyone, I'm Fawzia Beg, Director of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. Today I'm very happy and excited to be here to provide you with an update on the incredible work that has been happening as part of the Upstream community funding model. The more we move through the process, the more we are seeing and hearing how incredibly innovative and transformative an opportunity this fund creates. And today's presentation is all about the change that community has been asking for. As well, related to this, a recommendation for approval related to the Motion 5 2021 budget will be presented as directed by Council. I'd like to start by sharing a brief recap of the Upstream Fund journey to date. It's only been a few months, but we've already accomplished so much alongside community. Regional Council establishment of the Upstream Initiative Fund in December 2021 as part of the plan and budget deliberations. This funding provided an opportunity for the region to work differently with the community to develop a community-centered model to create a vibrant, healthy, and safe Waterloo region. Council asked staff to come back in April 2022 with the terms of reference. Staff brought these 5 principles to Council in April and received approval to build the process and the terms of reference based on these principles and the concepts of Upstream shared as part of that report. The current report includes a summary of our understanding of the concept of Upstream. Upstream has evolved over time, and simply put, it is preventive efforts that allow people to achieve their full potential. Currently, there are large system barriers that have been preventing members of our community from achieving their full potential. And this work is about removing those barriers to create a better region of Waterloo for all. It can include reforming fundamental social and economic structures and systems that distribute wealth, power, opportunities, and decision-making. This can further include a variety of initiatives focused on achieving optimal health and well-being that exist on a continuum. The more upstream the action, the greater the impact on a population level, as it is focused more on prevention. Middle and downstream approaches typically focus more on reducing risk or changing the effects of causes. Taken together, these approaches form a continuum of opportunities where change can be made to address many priorities and issues simultaneously. We've been working with community on a shared understanding of upstream and will continue to use this evolving understanding to ensure efforts funded through this work really focus on preventing the impact of the social determinants of health. The Community Safety Wellbeing Plan acknowledged the social determinants of health, while also focusing on truth and reconciliation, equity, diversity and inclusion, anti-racism, anti-oppression, discrimination, giving us actionable opportunities that respond to current needs identified by community related to upstream initiatives. The model we've co-designed has embedded the 5 council-approved principles in new and innovative ways, but most importantly, in meaningful ways for the community. Staff have explored ways to mobilize the funding in ways that align with current strategy, policy, and community need. In this way, we have not only worked on a community model for the Upstream Fund, but the approach in itself is upstream. Using a model founded on extensive research, community engagement, and best practices, the process for distributing funding is founded in innovation and designed to effect broad change. By not limiting the process to just distribution of funds, but embedding collaboration, resource sharing, and relationship building, this fund is designed to transform the community funding to better meet the needs of the community. And by taking a pilot approach, we continue to learn and grow and improve through the process. A little more on the upstream approach. Together, myself, along with many colleagues from Public Health and Community Services and CAO's office, have been working hard to turn all of our engagement sessions and conversations into action. It is not just the end results of the project that will be funded that are upstream, but the process of the funding as well as a whole. Using a collective approach and model, we are aiming to unite multiple projects to create upstream change. We have designed a process that sets the community up for success. This includes moving beyond just distributing funds to a model that provides an array of resources using a collective approach to create broad change rooted in the spirit of the dish with one spoon philosophy. In addition, we're being innovative in community-led system-supported model for both the funds and decision-making. And finally, we're moving away from just reporting to also supporting so that we are building capacity as we go. All of this intentional work in community collaborations has led to a 3-step model for funding that we have shared in June. I'll briefly walk you through the 3 steps and where we are and where we are going. Currently, we are on track for distributing funds this year. Step 1 is open call of engagement. This has been launched as community collaborative events. I'll speak more to this in a minute, but the applications for upstream funding will be launching tomorrow along with these collaborative events. This step will remain in place from August to mid-September, with applications being open until September 23rd. Step 2 is related to decision-making. As mentioned, the governance and decision-making part of the fund is incredibly innovative and designed to improve impact and accountability. Focusing on collaboration instead of competition, community is in working towards common goals, priorities, and needs. To do this, we're in the process of forming a community change committee that will be region supported to evaluate applications and allocate funding. This is in response to the immense amount of feedback and recommendations in the Community Safety Wellbeing Plan and upstream conversations to include community in decision-making and to support self-determined communities. Open call nomination forms for this committee will be launching tomorrow as well. And the timeline for this work is between mid-September to November, with staff awarding funding to successful applications in December. Step 3 is about sharing stories on impact and learning. In the co-led model, the region is able to provide support with applications, tracking, and ongoing support, and supporting funding recipients in a collaborative process with innovative ways of reporting, including storytelling. So this is really about moving away from just reporting to supporting by building capacity, relationship, and collaborations, demonstrating outcomes. We will, of course, continue to provide updates to Council during this entire process. As the funds are allocated and the work progresses, we will continue to return to keep you updated. Now, a little bit more about the upcoming community collaboration events. You may recall that I sent a memo out to Council with the launch of the community collaborative events, and I'm so excited to see these are happening. Over the next 6 weeks, we will have a series of community collaborative events across Waterloo Region, both in person and virtually. These events are opportunities to come together to collaborate, share resources, and to learn more about the diversity of work happening in the community. At these events is also an opportunity to hear more about funding programs available, see the funding application, and get support with submitting applications. These events are open to all in the community, including community organizations, partner, and council. And finally, key to ensuring all of what I shared with you today stays on course and continues to send your community is having the right resources in place to support the work. This brings me to the recommendation in front of you today. At the June 22nd Council meeting, staff committed to bringing a recommendation back to Council on how to effectively allocate the remaining funds, $180,000, from the January 2021 Budget Motion 5 Upstream initiatives. Staff recommend that the remaining funds be allocated to support the launch and implementation of the first year of the Upstream Fund in the following ways. By investing in a temporary community collaborator resource to facilitate and project manage year 1 of the Upstream Fund. This role will support community engagement, collaboration, and relationship building, and will work with communities to champion upstream concepts and identify important actions for change. Investing in external expertise to support impact evaluation and reporting around the process and outcomes is the second purpose. The external expertise will provide a more extensive exploration of how local communities are doing upstream work and will build our understanding of the concept of upstream in local initiatives and innovations. And finally, we put towards supporting community engagement, collaboration, events, materials, resources needed to launch the pilot. This will be particularly important to ensure communication across municipalities communities across municipalities can participate in this opportunity. I thank you for your time and support, and happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I'll just take this off.
All right. I see a question from Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Clark. I would be really pleased to move this motion, and just to say that Councillor Shantz and I had an opportunity to participate on the community safety and well-being process. And there's a phrase that's often associated with people from the disabled community, and it's nothing about us without us. And I would have to tell you that I think this whole process for community safety and well-being and coming forward with these recommendations has, I think, created a new gold standard for how we can communicate, walk alongside the community, and be led by the community for things that are their priority. I was really, really impressed with the engagement by the community to come up with this plan.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be happy to second the motion. I did want to thank Fozzie and Jenny Smith and other staff who have put this together, and thank them for a couple of the check-in meetings that they've had with me in regards to this. I think this is setting a course that I certainly concur with in regards to the Upstream Fund that I put forward in front of Council, and do support also the expenditure that's being recommended from what's being referred to as Motion 5 in the 2021 budget process, which of course is quite some time ago, with the remaining funds in that money that did not get spent for its exact intended purpose, some of which was spent subsequently for the facilitation of the Community Wellbeing Safety Plan. And now the remaining amount can be used for good purpose as staff are recommending. So I support the recommendations, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Galloway. I did have one question, and it may be coming out of some confusion on my part, but I'll ask it anyway. One of the things that I liked about this model and this process was I believed it provided an opportunity for small grassroots community organizations who might not ordinarily get a look in at regional support. It provided an opportunity for them to really lead that process. When I saw the invitations go out, though, to the community events, I saw the invitations going much more broadly, including to large and established organizations that already get a lot of regional funding. So my question is, how do you see the model preventing these more established groups from just sort of overwhelming and crowding out the groups that we're intentionally trying to engage here?
Thank you, Chair. And in response to your question, I think that part of the process is really looking at it being as more than just the dollars, and part of that is inviting everyone who's doing work in this area to collaborate. And so sometimes the conversations is about what are people doing separately, independently, that could be aligned, and what are resources that can be shared. And that is in addition to funding allocations. In terms of ensuring that, and so that's why you probably see the broader invitations, is to really invite everyone who is involved in this work to those tables for discussion. For the actual allocation of funding, definitely grassroots is a priority, and that's part of the Community Change Table Committee. Terms of reference would be really identifying those priorities in allocating the funds that will center grassroots organizations to receive funding.
Thank you. That's helpful. Councillor McGarry?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Fawzia. Thank you for the presentation this morning. I think that there has been a fair bit of engagement. I know that Waterloo Region is certainly a leader when it comes to community safety and well-being, as we've seen for years of supporting work like Crime Prevention Council and CJI and a number of other initiatives. My question would be is, I understand it going out to community agencies and it'll be an application-based process at all. But if there are some gaps in some of the work that we feel that would be beneficial to do that upstream prevention work, how can we ensure that those gaps are filled, or that some of the work that I believe is essential in addressing the root causes of community safety are not addressed in the applications?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, through you, the Chair. Again, these community collaborative events is really also an opportunity to discuss priorities and to really think about what would be the priorities for communities in terms of need and funding. And so the opportunity remains that people that are attending these community collaborative events can still provide feedback into those priorities. And so through these community conversations that are ongoing through the open call community collaborative events phase, there will be that what I would consider like a natural evolution of prioritizing in some ways into what could be the decision-making priorities. And so I would say that that would be one approach. Another approach would be ongoing feedback and consultation about what would be priorities from council's perspective. I think that's definitely certainly something that could be incorporated more intentionally into this work. Looking at and reviewing, past priorities and current needs as well to ensure that gaps are not left. And of course, we've said that this is a pilot year. and that we are launching, creating many different processes and being innovative and being community centered, that there's a huge opportunity to learn from these next few months and to continue to build that process for next year. Right, and I think that's why it's such an amazing opportunity, that the door doesn't shut come December. It just opens another way. And so things that maybe were bubbling up now can be continued to be looked at through the next funding cycle next year. So there's so much opportunity, I think, to look at those priorities and ensure that gaps aren't being created.
Thank you. And if I could have a follow-up, Madam Chair. I think one of the things that I would want to know as a head of council from my community, and I would think all other heads of communities or heads of councils in our communities may think the same thing, but I know that it's a top priority here in Cambridge, just as an example, to ensure that our children and youth are looked after and supported right from really infancy on forward, especially those that may be at risk or have families at risk of, not being able to see their children grow and thrive. So if indeed Cambridge recognized that we didn't have a lot of buy-in for providing sports and arts and sort of supported programs for those kids at risk, how would our municipality kind of ensure that that was going forward if we didn't seem to have an agency that was sort of stepping up to what we think is a priority? So how would that work?
Absolutely. So through you, the chair, I think that's what's really essential in the last part is recommendation, is that community collaborator. That role will really help work with communities and municipalities. We definitely realize that people are in different states of maturity, or there's different tables that are present in different municipalities and communities that support this work. And so that community collaborator will help fill some of those gaps as well and work with, for example, Cambridge, City of Cambridge, the Municipality of Cambridge, to really help mobilize and facilitate some of that organizing. So if the priority is children and youth, so pulling organizations together to have those meaningful conversations so that in a position then to move forward with that priority.
Thank you. That's more clear cut. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. I'm looking everywhere, Councillor Foxon, and I see no hands up. So I think we can go to the motion. It's been moved by Chair Redmond and seconded by Councillor Galloway. Please use your yes or no buttons to vote that the Region of Waterloo allocate the remaining funds from Motion 5, Upstream Initiatives, January 2021, being $180,000, to support the implementation of Year 1 of the Upstream Fund as outlined in the report. And I believe that's carried unanimously. Thank you, and thanks again, Fazia. All right, we are on to the Sexual Assault Support Center's funding request, and I'm going to call on Mr. Sweeney, Commissioner of Community Services, to speak to the report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm actually speaking on behalf of several of my colleagues as this request went before my colleague, Mr. Dyer in Finance, and also Julie in Public Health. So I've offered to bring it back. The recommendation is in the report. We recognize the incredible work that is being done and the need that is in this community for this type of work. However, without a discretionary funding budget within community services or public health and the mandate that we both carry, our recommendation is that we don't have the capacity to support this with regional dollars. And I hope the information, the context that was in our recommendation was helpful, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Foxon has a question.
Well, just actually through the chair, discretionary funding. Now that this also refers back to the earlier delegation, and under the grants, is there discretionary funding? And if so, would we inform the group so they can apply appropriately?
Good.
Yes, that's certainly possible as a follow-up. sorry, that's certainly possible as a
Yeah,
follow-up.
so if
Councillor
you,
Fox.
if they could be made aware of the application process, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, will do.
I see no other questions. Do I have a mover for the motion to take no action? Sorry? Does he? Oh, I don't recognize actual hands, Les. Is that a motion, Councillor Armstrong? I believe so. And a seconder? Councillor Rents? And we will now start the vote. And that is carried. Thank you. There is a second part to that the Regional Council advocated to the Ministry of the Attorney General for an increase in funding to allow the Sexual Assault Support Centre to address the backlog of individuals needing counseling support, and that's contained in the report. All right. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. Just for information, I'm meeting with the minister on this issue at AMO. We already sent off a brief, and so hopefully we'll get some progress.
Good. Thank you. All right. We have no other items on the community services agenda. I do want to draw your attention to the correspondence from Charles Nichols. Mr. Sweeney did mention that earlier, but Mr. Nichols was not able to delegate to us today, but did send a letter which is in your addendum package. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, you should. Mr. Nichols is always very plain spoken and useful. So that's been received for information. Is there any other business? I see no other business. Our next meeting is September 6th, 2022. I believe we're going to adjourn for lunch, and then, no, we're not. We're going to adjourn and then for like a bathroom break, anything?
I think